Yeah, I first came across Didgeridoo really when I lived in Australia back in the early 80s, and I was a musician who'd come here to work as the music director of a group called Circus Oz, which at that time was a very politically driven group of collective group of people back in the early 80s, 1981. I was one of the first recruits to this group, and a Pommy coming to Australia from the other side of the world. And I was a trained musician. I had been studying French horn and brass instruments and classical. I'd grown up with a very classical background. At the same time, I'd also had my own kind of tearaway connection through rock music and a lot of contemporary music styles, my own band. And that's how I'd met the circus. And I came back with them as the music director in '81. And practically the first thing that I saw when I got here were didgeridoos. A friend of the group had delivered 3 didgeridoos to their studio, and I tried them, and I was not impressed. I was momentarily interested, but it wasn't until I heard, I think it was Joe Gaia playing solo didgeridoo at a rock concert opening for Ian Dury and the Blockheads, that all of a sudden I realized that this instrument had huge potential. My own experiences with listening to didgeridoo had been confined to BBC anthropological recordings of traditional ceremony and traditional dance, but not well recorded, and I wasn't interested in this sound. It didn't touch me. But as soon as I heard Joe Gaia play in this large auditorium, that was an eye-opener and an ear-opener and a place for me to realize that there was a lot more to this instrument than what I had previously thought. But I didn't feel comfortable playing the didgeridoo myself as a foreigner. This was before the didgeridoo was a common sight around the world, and before you saw an instrument in just about every music store all over the internet, people putting on didgeridoo festivals, etc., which has been happening globally now since the early mid-90s, I think, was when the World Didgeridoo Festival scene began to kind of gain momentum, which I think happened especially after Yothu Yindi started to tour globally. I saw them first in London in 1990. Anyway, for me, the journey to playing didgeridoo started with a wish to make music in the circus that, for some of the spectacular parts of the show, that supported the political direction of the group, which was to throw attention on Aboriginal land rights. And my belief and my interest was to transfer the circular breathing technique to brass instruments, especially in the show, especially the sousaphone, which played like a didgeridoo, sounds very much like a didgeridoo, and gives the unmistakable connection to a feeling of support for Aboriginal culture at the foundation of the show. Because my belief is music is very, very powerful as a dramatic force and as an emotive grounding for a lot of theatre and for film, for sure. So I was playing, not myself, but using arrangements of brass, Western brass instruments that unmistakably pointed to an Aboriginal influence and respect for Aboriginal culture within the context of a bigger show. And that worked really well. But soon I really felt like it was, for me, if I was interested in Aboriginal culture, and I was, and in the didgeridoo, which I was becoming interested in for myself, I couldn't play. Though I was a brass player, I could blow didgeridoo, but I couldn't do the breathing. I spent as much time as I could when I wasn't working with the group on the road and going bush with a friend, Don Rosella, who really was the person who mentored me into a deeper connection with Aboriginal culture, the land in Australia, which I don't separate from my inspiration for playing the didgeridoo itself, and traveling into, you know, deeper Aboriginal communities and into the Northern Territory, where I basically was asking permission as a white foreigner from the other side of the world to play the didgeridoo. Would it be okay for me to play? And the answer came back that yes, it would be fine for me to play the didgeridoo, as long as I wasn't playing traditional music and I wasn't trying to imitate or represent Aboriginal culture. And so for me, my journey with the didgeridoo, starting in the early 80s, has been one of self-discovery and the discovery of the potency of this instrument as a musical vehicle for a lot of my music since, or most of my music, since I turned fully back into music in the mid-80s. And the didgeridoo has become my major musical voice. But I couldn't be doing it without a consciousness of where it came from, and having made those journeys into Aboriginal communities and Aboriginal culture and the land in Australia back in the 80s. And I'm here in Melbourne now for this will be what's my fourth time in Australia since those early days. But there have been long periods of time where I've been out in the world exploring the didgeridoo as an incredible instrument in all kinds of contemporary music, from many, many multicultural connections and multi-genre, musical genre connections. That is my interest, really. It's exploring, explaining, and living the didgeridoo as a contemporary force in the modern world, but with its foot firmly, and my roots with it firmly planted in my time in Australia.